Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining today's webinar presented by Public Spend Forum. We're just about ready to get started, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our host for today, Frank McNally. Frank?
Thanks, Nisa, and thank you everyone out there for joining us today, whether you're on the West Coast, East Coast, or somewhere in between. We're excited to have you so we can introduce to you this webinar, Closing the Deal, How to Win in Government Contracting. This is presented by Public Spend Forum and GovShop. We've got a couple great speakers today, gentlemen who probably need no introduction, but I'm going to ask them to do it anyway, starting with our founder and CEO of Public Spend Forum, Raj Sharma.
Hi, everyone. This is Raj. Happy to jump in over here and share some tips.
Excellent. The man in the middle, Benjamin McMartin.
Hey, Frank, thanks for the intro, and looking forward to chatting with everybody today and really getting into some of those tips and tricks on how to deal with government procurement.
Excellent. My name is Frank McNally. I'm our Director of Learning and Content Development here at Public Spend Forum, which is an awesome market intelligence platform for public sector buyers and suppliers. We've got a supplier and market knowledge and data framework, best practices on how to improve, how to buy, how to do your job better, a global community and network of peers and experts in public procurement, all on the web at publicspendforum.net. Raj, anything to add on Public Spend Forum? This has been your baby from the start.
Thanks, Frank. No, as you mentioned, I think you'll be hearing more about a number of the products and services we're introducing, including some of the procurement innovation services. So we're excited to tell you more about that as we get started.
Absolutely. It's been hard to sit on these exciting developments, but news is coming on Public Spend Forum and innovation. You might already know about GovShop. That's our market research and supplier intelligence platform at govshop.com. It's easy to use and free, a very intuitive browser-based like search engine. You can go to govshop.com and start researching vendors or contract vehicles or commodity codes right away. It's built for the government procurement marketplace with special filters and tools and techniques that make your job a little bit easier there, whether it's market research inside a government or trying to get found by your target market or your target buyers on the supplier side. So check out govshop.com. If you haven't claimed your company's profile, you can do that today. It's absolutely free and a great way to find some viable leads. Let me tell you a little bit about what we'll be discussing today in this introduction to how to win government contracts. This is an adaptation of a one-day training that we have delivered that covers sort of this sizable market opportunity that companies can really do well in if you can navigate the barriers. There are barriers, and we talk about what those are in this workshop, and we're going to cover them today. So sort of our goals for the workshop are to help people distinguish between the private sector market and the public sector market. It is different. We survey the rules and regulations that make government procurement unique. Those include available avenues for approaching the public sector, whether that's through subcontracting, prime vehicles, socioeconomic programs, or mentor-protege. People understand that there's a different type of evaluation method for government contracting. So points of entry matter, and it dictates whether how you're going in dictates the way that you're going to approach these contract opportunities. We also help companies create capability statements, conduct analyses of the market to help determine viable customers and agencies, which is really important as we're going to talk about. We break it down into 4 lessons, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I just wanted to show sort of what's covered in this course, but each lesson covers a key question, and this key question really puts to task what we want to understand and differentiate between what we do typically in private sector business and how we've got to change that or adapt that in the public sector. So we were joking around before we started this course earlier today that we could actually call this course How Not to Win Government Contracts, because there's hundreds of ways that you can win government contracts. There's some common ways that you can also lose them. So we thought that would be a good place to start for our webinar today. The first common mistake that vendors make is an over-reliance on socioeconomic designations. If you do qualify as an 8A firm, or if you're a veteran-owned business, by all means, you should pursue this socioeconomic designation, but it is not a panacea, as some might know. There has been a common misconception that if you get this small business designation, contracts will fall into your lap. Well, that's not exactly the case. That's a secret that's been out of the bag for quite a while. So the competition amongst even smaller socioeconomic categories is still intense. These companies are still pursuing set-aside contracts, so competition is there. But it's definitely something good to have. A second common mistake, and I'll let Raj and Ben just jump in if there's anything you guys want to add on any of this, by the way, I should say. But our second most common mistake is investing in GSA schedules when you don't fully understand them. GSA schedules can open a lot of doors for companies. It's certainly something to look at, but it's not easy. And you also have to understand, are GSA schedules a method of contracting that your target agencies use? I know I've worked in government. I know that some contracting officers don't even prefer to use GSA schedules, for better or for worse. So don't take 12 to 18 months filling out paperwork and going through this exercise of GSA schedule achievement, only to find out later that your target agencies don't even use those schedules.
Yeah, Frank, that's a great point, and I'll just hop in real quick with a little
Please.
information on that. This is Ben. I can tell you as an Army contracting officer, I had to let a vendor down who came into my office only to say, hey, good news. I spent the last 18 months and I got a GSA schedule. Now we can really do business together, only to find out, Army didn't use GSA schedules, right? We had our own service contracts. So, you have to know the way that your customer buys before you go invest in some of the stuff that can cost a lot of money.
Absolutely. Our third common mistake is spray and pray capture management. What I mean by this is attempting to put in 10 proposals and hope to win one. If you're a commodity seller, if what you're selling is low price, technically acceptable, this might not be a bad strategy. But Raj, you built a consulting firm. Did you start by filling out every proposal you possibly could and just crossing your fingers?
Luckily, quite the opposite. I think it goes back to knowing who you are as a business, right? And what problem you're solving for your clients, and having a clear message and approach around that. So I think if you know that as a starting point, then you can be really targeted in the opportunities and the proposals you pick to respond to, right? Because you know for sure this is what you're really solid at, and you can tell a really good story around it that's compelling to anybody who's looking at it, right? So I think yeah, but Frank, as this says, too often though, unfortunately, we see companies, I've advised a number of them on growth strategies. There's no real strategy, let's say. It's just, hey, we have an 8A, or we have, we're due this and that, and let's just go after lots of proposals. And we know that's a very costly and ineffective approach.
Absolutely, and it's a great segue into our fourth common mistake, not being realistic about your capabilities. This is kind of the, if you have a problem, we'll solve it, vanilla ice paradox of federal business development. If you're trying to do everything that your customer needs, I mean, sure, I bet if you did get into an agency, you and your team could probably solve these problems. But when you're developing business, having this broad brush of we can do anything isn't really going to fly. It's best to focus on what you're best at. What are your differentiators? What are your unfair competitive advantages? What is it about your company or your products or procedures that is different and that can solve the problems that your target agencies? So you really have to understand how your target agencies are going about researching and buying goods and services. And these are very linked, these two mistakes, not being realistic about capabilities and not understanding how your target market buys goods and services. If you're there in your seat today, scratching your head saying, well, gosh, I don't really know who my target agency really is, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you, tell you a little bit more about how you can get more familiar with your target agencies and understand your sort of unique position, your target market, product market fit, pardon me. So don't make that mistake. Don't try to do everything for everybody, because you'll end up doing nothing. The sixth most mistake, and I, as a contracting officer, unfortunately have experienced this with companies that go to bid, when they don't read the solicitation and follow the instructions precisely. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the tail really does wag the dog in government procurement. The process is king. You read every single word of that solicitation. Don't skip ahead to the statement of work. Don't open it up all immediately to the evaluation criteria and see if you think you're going to win. There are nuances, I call them nullifying nuances, that can take you right out of a competition. But if you discover it early enough, there's ways that you can triage that. Maybe it's getting onto a team, maybe it's hiring somebody with a particular certification. What you don't want is to be 48 hours out of out of the proposal deadline, and your attorney or counsel comes back and points out something that you didn't read and that will potentially nullify you and take you right out. You really don't want that to happen. Ben, anything to add there? I know with the CMMC coming out, this is worrying a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of standards, certifications, and really what you would think were in the weeds requirements that are absolutes, meaning if you don't qualify, you're out. Unfortunately, I hear too many stories on number 6, including folks that are bidding what's really hot right now, which are the SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research open calls. Those agencies are getting 1,000, 1,500 proposals. So the first sweep for through those proposals is who followed the instructions. They don't care how good your technology is, because they're going through that first sweep to try and narrow, and it's going to be all who followed the instructions makes it through.
I think the anecdote that I saw recently, this was a pretty hot topic on LinkedIn, was the SBIR proposal that got rejected because it had 11 pages in the technical volume when the requirement was for 10. I think they argued that the 11th page, look at table of contents, guess what? It doesn't matter. Guess what? Also, inside baseball, dirty secret, nobody will admit to this, but you've got 50 proposals you're evaluating and you're on the government side. The first thing you're going to do, I'm sorry, this is just how it works, is how many can we just kick out for non-compliance? Because then we don't have to read as many pages. We can do a better job of evaluating. Don't get kicked out for something silly. Our 7th mistake, this is something that Raj, I know you really believe in, and you do a great job of discussing this, but failing to identify your differentiators. Why is this such an important mistake to avoid?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of some of the things that we've discussed already, right? About capabilities and spray and pray. Look, there's lots of companies in the market at the end of the day, right? And at least at a higher level, they all look the same if you're not digging deep. And so knowing, how you're different, knowing how you're different from the competition, knowing how you address problem sets and help generate impact and results for your clients in a different way is really, really critical. If you can't sit there and can't tell a good story around it yourselves, right? Imagine if somebody else is reading that later on, they obviously will not be able to tell how you're different. So it's really important as a business, all right? This is not just about marketing or responding to proposals. It's about who you are as a business, making sure that you're different in that how you're solving problems and how you're making an impact for your clients, and then being able to tell a story around that so people can understand. So I think this is really key. Otherwise, you're one of thousands of firms out there.
Absolutely. That's great advice. We've got a blog over on Public Spend Forum that goes a little bit deeper into each of these mistakes. We'll include that in our post webinar email, and maybe Unisa wants to throw that up in the chat and link to that blog as well. All right, well, let's get into some of the lessons that we want to impart today to help you win more government contracts. The first lesson is about speaking the language and playing this game of GovCon. We introduced it with the key question of why is the government, federal specifically, why is the federal government such a unique and challenging buyer? Some of these lessons are applicable to state and local, of course. But why is the government such a unique and challenging buyer? Well, number one, it's all public funds. It's all taxpayer dollars. We need to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. about 500 billion of these get spent every year on discretionary contracts. And the understanding that is super important. The people who are spending, i.e. spending the money, the program owners, the contracting officers, it's not their money. It's not their stakeholders' money. It's not their funds that they raised in a capital raise. It's other people's money. And so there's a lot of process and procedure and rigmarole that goes into spending it. The government also has a unique fiscal year. They don't do the traditional calendar year. So we're in the second quarter of the government's fiscal year, which starts in October and ends at the end of September. So to win government contracts, you need to think about your activities in the calendar. So in Q1, which we've just sort of come out of, you should be prospecting. You should be developing relationships. A lot of agencies in a normal budgetary year will have their budgets available to them in the first quarter, but they're still sort of understanding their programmatic priorities. You should be talking to them, learning from them, informing them, helping them think about these things so that in the second quarter, where we are right now, about a third of the way there, the requirements development process will traditionally happen. Agencies are thinking about what they want to buy, how they want to buy it. They're defining requirements. They're attending the winter conferences. They're starting to do the market research. This is prime time. You need to be out of your office. You need to be meeting people. You need to be on the phone, responding to RFIs, doing everything that you can to seed the requirements with some type of differentiator that maps to your company's value. That's why those tips are so important. If you don't know what makes your company different, how can you help inform a solicitation or a potential requirement in a manner that will, I'm not going to say predispose, but I am going to say predispose that opportunity, or at least make it a little bit more advantageous for you. By the time Q3 comes around, April, May, and June, the larger contracting opportunities are going out for bid. These are the ones with, long turnarounds, the long evaluation procedures, formal source selections. If you're competing in this, in this market for these large opportunities, the third quarter is pretty crazy for you. By the time the fourth quarter comes around, there's sort of a saying, and Ben, you could tell me if this is true or not, but if it's not done by July 4th, it's probably waiting till after Labor Day. I know that was true when I was a contracting officer. Still true today?
Yeah, when you get to the last quarter, everything's sweep up. So these are where the government's going to buy its options that it has available to it. It's going to use the instruments that it already has in place, whether that's schedules or IDIQ contracts, purchase card. This is where a lot of money is going out the door, but it's on contracts that have already been put in place for multiple years. So if you're looking to bid the new contracts to be in that position to be getting the sweep up funds, you're really looking in that second quarter to start priming the pump and go after those opportunities.
Raj, you've been successful in this market as well. I mean, do you agree that sort of the Q1 and Q2 months, where we are right now, do you find government professionals a little bit more available to speak and learn about sort of what vendors are offering?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not, I would say I haven't found the difference between Q1, Q2, Q3. Definitely Q4 is a bad one, right? So that one I can say for sure that July, August, September are not good months to be going out and trying to pitch. But I will say that I think yeah. So that's what I've found, Frank. I think that's the most apparent to me. I do think January, February, March is a good set of months too, because usually in October, November, December, there's a lot of, because of the year end of activity from the year before, we've seen as there's a lot of contracts set up and everything that happens that actually also slows things down a little bit. So Q2, January, February, March may be the best months.
I think you're probably right. Everybody's on that the new year, new you vibe. They're out making resolutions and doubling down and, wanting to start the year strong. So it's a good time to consider picking up the phone or beating the pavement there. Also want to call attention to July, traditionally a very slow month. However, there is one important event that happens in July, and that's NCMA's World Congress, a very large gathering of federal contracting professionals. So if you are interested or if you're a member of NCMA, World Congress, really great event to attend, and a good chance to make some networking connections. Well, so we talked about the budget, we talked about the calendar. Why is the sales cycle different? There's a couple of reasons. And this is unfortunately true despite itself. The federal acquisition system is designed not to avoid risk, but to mitigate risk and minimize risk. But however, what the actual output is, or the manifestation of this, is contracting professionals just don't want to take risks. They actually favor that over increasing value. And I'm speaking very generally, but generally speaking, on the whole, risk aversion is more powerful than a desire to create value. Now we're seeing some of this change. Definitely, there's some amazing civil servants out there where this equation is absolutely flipped. If you find these individuals, celebrate them. Do not take them for granted. But generally speaking, risk avoidance, it's just not incentivized. There's not much of an incentive for contracting professionals to take risks. They don't, get a bonus based on how good of a contract they award. Maybe they should. They just don't. So it's just the way it is. I talked earlier about the tail wagging the dog, the process wagging the dog. This is true. The policies, the procedures, the regulations typically are what will inform or end up being the deciding factor for some contract awards. It should be the other way. It should be, what's best for the country, what's best for the mission. Unfortunately, that process will wag the dog a little bit. Third, buyers are not always the decision makers, and vice versa. We're going to talk about this in a couple of slides, but there are a number of different government professionals that you're going to come across in your business development efforts. There's the contracting officer, yes. They're the individuals that sign the contract, but they're not always the decision makers. There's often a program or budget owner somewhere who owns the program, who is responsible for whatever goods and services get provided, making sure those go to satisfy the mission need. Sometimes there's an influencer or political appointee that you don't even know about that's pulling the strings somewhere. So the sales cycle is very different than the private sector for some of these reasons. Here's what the process looks like. This is my typical 4-phase acquisition life cycle, starting with acquisition planning. This is when market research is conducted. This is when the RFIs go out. This is your opportunity to inform the requirement. You should be speaking to, sharing, helping, asking questions. This is your time for communication, because once the solicitation goes out onto the streets in phase 2, that's it. No more chance to inform the solicitation. That's a quiet period. Contracting professionals legally and for all intents and purposes really won't speak to you about an active requirement when it's out on the street because of procurement integrity. The third phase is the award phase. You will not hear anything hardly unless there's questions. Everything's formal. Right? Any communication regarding the solicitation in the solicitation and award phase is formal and written. So you might be asked to submit a best and final offer or to clarify some things in your proposal. These are all going to happen in the award phase. And the award phase is also very structured. I talked earlier about sections L&M, instructions to offers, evaluation criteria. These things are super important because they dictate how the award decision will be made, assuming that your proposal is technically compliant. The final phase after the contract is awarded is, of course, post-award. That's delivery. It's the longest phase, as you would expect. Also, one of the sort of less talked about phases. There are some things that you really need to be doing because you've won one contract. Congratulations. You want to make sure you win the next contract. So several things you want to be doing in post-award include making sure you're on par with your options. If you do have options on your contract, make sure you can earn those follow-on options. Second is make sure there's a past performance record that's getting established. Building up your company's past performance is crucial to future success. So you really do want to have a past performance record formally logged into the CPARS or PEPARS systems, which I believe is now in beta.sam.gov. So there's definite things you want to be doing in post-award. Raj, Ben, anything I'm leaving out here that you think is worth emphasizing or discussing?
Yeah, just that in the planning phase, this is your opportunity to craft what the requirement is to you. So in responding to RFIs, the key piece is that you're replying in a manner that gives your company the best foot forward. So during the request for information, market survey, sources sought, or any kind of passive market research that the government's doing, the government's really undecided on how that evaluation criteria is going to look at that time. They're also undecided on what the final scope of work will look like at that time. So this is your opportunity to plant a bug in the government's ear about what good criteria is, what some best value technical scope is. And I mean, there's no secret here. You should be trying to craft that criteria and that scope so that it best fits your solution.
Absolutely. And that's not, always so easy. And there's a lot of different tactics to do that. It really just depends on your particular position, your relationships, and your leverage. And understanding really the things that go on in lesson 2, which is how government buyers consider and select vendors for contracting needs. The key question we consider in this lesson is how's your company going to change your communication, prospecting, and sales behavior to reflect these unique requirements? Because the government procurement process isn't like anything that you might be experienced with. How do government buyers make contracting decisions? Well, it's a solicitation, proposal, and award process. There's a proposal, there's a solicitation. Your proposal or offer strategy is going to be informed by that solicitation. I don't care what you discussed with your program counterparts or anybody on the government on the other side. If it says to do it in the proposal, you got to do it. Now, there's ways that you can sort of write between the lines, so to speak, and help people understand sort of that you've been speaking with, help signal that, this is you, because frankly, in the in the evaluation process, there's a very good chance that your proposal will be de-identified. The people that are evaluating it, number one, might have never heard of you ever, because program officials can often get can sometimes get OCI'd out of a solicitation, or B, they might not even know, who submitted these proposals. So it's really, really crucial to understand what that solicitation is requesting and that you write to that solicitation so that your proposal will be acceptable. And the key sections of the solicitation are the instructions to offers, the evaluation criteria, and beyond just the compliance with the terms and conditions, which are also super important as well. So that's really it. I mean, that's our number one. Yes, Raj, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna add here. I think, as has already been mentioned, before you get to this phase, right? I think the way you control the outcomes of this phase is if you've been engaged early on and through the RFI process, or just having discussions with the client ahead of time, right? Then you can make sure that, the way that these things come out in terms of evaluation criteria, what's asked for in a proposal, et cetera, is closer to the way you think it should be, right? And so I would just suggest that as a company, that if you're really doing your homework, and like in any business, I think this is different for government versus commercial, but having conversations with clients ahead of time, educating them and helping them think about their problem sets and how it can be solved, having things like white papers, et cetera, that help them think about the problem and how they might specify a requirement, right? How helping them understand how to evaluate different solutions, right? And the best firms out there are actually educating their clients ahead of time, right? So I would say that that's where you want to spend more of the time. And then when you get to this stage, it's a bit easier, right? I know it sounds, we make it sound easy, but I will say if you're not just doing the spray and capture approach as we discussed earlier, and actually planning this out, and you're engaging your clients in a meaningful way, you're educating them, and then this doesn't look as bad when it comes, in terms of what you need to respond to.
Yeah, no,
That's very good
gonna
advice.
add on to that piece that, and to tie that in, once you've got past the planning stage and you've put all the input in you can to try to steer that requirement towards what you're able to provide as a solution. Once you've got to the solicitation, your time to influence is over unless it's a draft RFP or something that the government's asking for comments on. So once you get to the true solicitation phase, where there's not going to be any more changes to the solicitation and it's out, the fact that you had told the government, hey, you guys are going the wrong way about this, your criteria is wrong, or, your scope's too broad and it's not going to provide the best value, or you're missing some of this extra solution that I'm able to provide, it is too late for that influence. You need to buckle down and match that solicitation word for word. All those extras and all that value that you wanted to add into that proposal, it's not going to get credit anymore. You've missed that phase. And what I often find, I know in my 11 years as a contracting official, you'd find that the vendors would still be trying to push that agenda in the proposal, but you can't get credit for it anymore. That time had passed. So once the instructions are out and that L&M is locked into stone, like we said at the beginning of this training, the government is all about process. So now it's your job to follow the process. Influence time's over, time to follow the process.
Really great advice for everyone listening today. One of my favorite things to do in this workshop and with, companies that are looking to get into the market is to break down solicitations. We tear the solicitation down. It's just when we pull off the FBO, we really get into what each section means and how you interpret these, because again, that's your roadmap to success or failure. And it kind of comes down to what the government cares about, right? This is the evaluation plan. Typically, you'll have evaluation criteria that generally map to this. There's a management approach section, technical capability, past performance, and price. The relative importance of these factors changes with every solicitation that you read. Sometimes technical approach or capability is the most important. Sometimes price is more important. If you don't know, you're not going to win. So you have to understand. And sometimes, by the way, in that pre-solicitation informing period, you can help your contracting professionals understand what should be most important. So it really is important to understand and read thoroughly the solicitations. Now, who are the people and what do they do? This is, if you like business development, if you like meeting people, if you like social pop psychology, you're going to love this. Prospecting with government professionals is a treat. You're going to meet some characters. You're going to meet some amazing people with, deep knowledge about federal government and U.S. history. I've met some incredible people, and I continue to meet incredible people in the government space. There's a couple different types of prospects. There's a requirement owner, program officers, PMs, budget owners, you might hear them called. These are typically the people that work on the program side. And like I said earlier, they're responsible for mission delivery. On the other end, you've got the acquisition professionals, the contracting officers and specialists. I was one of these individuals. We, once warranted, are the only individuals in the federal government who are authorized to sign contracts. We hold the checks. Now, that doesn't mean that we are decision makers per se. We typically try to uphold fair competition. Competition in contracting drives the contracting professional. So, but they're all involved, along with the requirements owner. The influencer in the middle, that's the wild card. Sometimes that can be a political appointee, literally someone hired by the President of the United States to execute a particular priority or achieve a certain outcome. These individuals, short tenured, often do not understand the government procurement process. However, they have a lot of influence. While they are low on control, they have a lot of influence. And so if you're talking to one of these individuals, and they're really excited about what you do, that can be an awesome feeling, but it might not translate potentially or right away into a government contract. I'm sure Raj and Ben have some comments here, so I want to pause and let them weigh in.
Yeah, absolutely. The government procurement is performed by an acquisition team. So you have a lot of stakeholders or customers or whatever you want to call them, who are going to influence different aspects of that. And it's personality driven to a degree. You have some contracting officers who really are the be all end all, and provided that they're supporting their customer, they have the authority to go forward and sign contracts unilaterally. The reality is they have a boss, they have customers and other influencers, stakeholders all around them, whether it's congressional input, whether it's higher level command input, whether it's the local command attorney, whether it is the comptroller or the folks controlling the money. So with each acquisition team, there's going to be a power center, there's going to be an influencer, and understanding who those people are, especially in the planning phase, can be so important for understanding how the decisions are going to be made further down the line.
Yeah, and I would just also add here, I think, yeah, knowing those people, it's really important. I think you can get to know when, no matter where you start, right? It's important to understand and ask some questions about, okay, who else is involved? How's this decision going to get made? I think those are really important questions to know. Also, I would just caution, sometimes the most senior executive, they might sound great to get a meeting with and meet regarding the requirement, but they may not be the person who actually has any influence. So I'll just caution on that. Like, for instance, the White House, right? Great to get a meeting with the White House. Go talk to them and they might get excited. However, in my experience, many times they will not have much influence, right, on a procurement. It depends, right? It all depends what it is. But the broader point being just, everyone has scarce time. It's more important to know who the right people to engage with on each opportunity, and that's going to vary. So it's just ask some smart questions up front. Who is involved? Who are going to be the decision makers? And focus on those people.
Yeah, there has to be you have to come to an honest conversation with those top level folks. I've heard way too many stories over my time of a company who gets a nice meeting with someone, higher up in DoD, and that person loves the technology that they have and says, absolutely, this is something that DoD needs to have. And then, the company starts to get strung along, and eventually those emails turn into, you have to talk to the contracting folks. I can't talk to you about this, right? But that conversation, that email comes, 6 months into business development. Well, that company has just wasted 6 months trying to develop that requirement with that stakeholder. You got to be okay with having the upfront conversation to say, hey, it's great that you love the technology. What do you think about avenues for actually putting us on contract, and have that conversation up really early? Because at least then if you get the answer that says, you know what, honestly, I'm not a contracting person. I don't really understand how that works. And believe me, these political appointees don't know how that contracting process works. You can have that conversation up front, and maybe they can steer you to somebody who can actually work with you on it.
And
Yeah.
that's absolutely, I mean, this is just amazing wisdom. Yes, Raj, please.
Sorry, one more thing to add. I think this slide, we could continue, I think, for a while. One other thing I would caution on is, I think all of us, I know I have paid a lot of fees to, say, advisors and others who seem to bring a big Rolodex with them. I could just be cautious of that. I think because, again, as we're talking here, right, there's each opportunity varies. And sometimes, like, especially advisors, and where you might end up spending money where, if they know lots of very, very senior people, let's say, politicals, et cetera, they may not be the right people, right? So it goes back to your overall strategy, what kinds of work you're doing, who are the target agencies, how do they buy, who are the right sets of people that you need to be able to target. So just be cautious as you're picking out advisors, just because I know there's a lot of money paid for that. and a lot of times it's not used well.
And we focus a lot of attention in our workshop on strategies to engage and communicate with these people, because it is just super important, as you're probably gathering. And don't worry, this webinar is being recorded, and we're going to send everybody a recording, a link to the recording, so you'll be able to kind of pick all this up again if you need to. All right, we talked about in the mistakes that vendors make, failing to identify your differentiators. You know, what is it about your product? You know, there's needs and there's desires. Everybody needs a laptop. Some people desire a MacBook. How can you sort of reflect that? What is it about your company or your offers that has that secret sauce that's going to help you understand your unique value proposition? Right there in the middle of that Venn diagram, that's your product market fit. But you're going to need advantages. What's your unfair competitive advantage? Maybe that's a socioeconomic designation. Maybe you're going to be one of the first companies to get this CMMC cybersecurity requirement that DoD is going to be requiring. Understand what these things are. You're going to need to lead with them. And then, you know, as you do this, these exercises are important. They help you home in on your product market fit. What agencies actually have your problems? Skate to where the puck is going. Create a go-to-market strategy that's forecasting opportunities where these problems exist, and agencies that have a need for your specific services. Know the contracts and vehicles that they use. Know, do they typically buy, you know, firm fixed price contracts? Or are they using cost reimbursement? Or are they buying off schedules? What companies are the big players? What are the large prime contractors that are winning most of the work in your target agencies? Because there's another way to get into government contracting, and that's subcontracting with these firms. And by the way, a large contractor is not going to have any interest in you unless you have some differentiating factor that's going to make them more attractive. So it goes both ways, government, but also subcontracting. And then what are the roadblocks that I need to prepare for? I think we started to sort of skirt around this earlier when we were talking about getting meetings and having this long process. I mean, the first roadblock is just understanding the emotional journey that you're going to go on in this pursuit of government deals. There will be times where you'll go home and you'll tell your partner or your kids about an amazing meeting and day that you had, and this contract is right around the corner and you're going to get there. And it might very well be there, but it might be 12 months down the road. You have to maintain level-headedness. You have to understand the process so that you don't get yourself too far out over your skis, because that's just emotionally draining. And perseverance is probably the #1 trait that you have to develop business in the public sector. It's not transparent. There's not a lot of trust in contractors, unfortunately. The pace and the tempo always varies, different everywhere you go. You've got to be patient. You've got to be perseverant.
Yeah,
go ahead, Raj.
Yeah, Frank, I would just add, you know, you're right. Generally speaking, there isn't a lot of trust, but I think it's partly my personal opinion, and kind of having seen this, is I think it's because of some of these issues and mistakes and things that we talked about early on that we started with, mistakes that companies make, right? I think if you go in with no clear understanding of a client's problems, right? I don't care which market you're operating in, you should get thrown out of the room, honestly. That's what I would do, right? If you don't understand my business coming in, and then you don't deserve to be there, right? And that's where you erode trust, right? And then if you don't have any clear differentiators and you're just basically, you know, presenting a vanilla approach, then again, that erodes trust, right? So I think to that point, you know, going back to some of the basics that we discussed, knowing where, you know, there's a good product market fit, knowing which agencies to go after, knowing what your differentiators are, knowing the client's problem sets. Those are all really critical factors that I think in any market, if you go back, it'll actually be refreshing. That's what I found. And people find it refreshing that, hey, somebody who's actually knows my business, can talk about it in a meaningful way, and actually can bring something that will have an impact, right? That's one advantage then that you may have, is you can actually set yourself apart pretty easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Our third lesson covers traditional paths to government revenue. We want to think about the methods that government contractors have available to them. What has traditionally been used, and what should you consider for your business? Everyone should know by now that you go to fbo.gov, but now betasam.gov or sam.gov to find federal contract opportunities. Right, that's where they are. There's also GSA eBuy. We talk about these traditional methods. We talk about the traditional methods of contracting, the contract types that you might be most interested in as a vendor. If you're just starting out, going to the left of this graph and trying to find micro purchases or simplified acquisition procedures are really great ways to start to get experience doing work for the government. It might not be really high dollars, but the experience you'll gain will be priceless. And then what do you do when you find an opportunity? This is a big part. I said earlier, one of my favorite parts of the workshop is the solicitation teardown. It's really important to know what to do when you find an opportunity. Read the contract, get that compliance matrix together, analyze the statement of work and scope of services, look for your edge, find your differentiators, how they map to the requirement, comply, and then consider how that evaluation process is going to result in an award. We offer some amazing resources on Public Spend Forum and through this course. This is one of them, our supplier resource guide. It's got basics of supplying to the public sector, finding opportunities with hyperlinks, by the way. I think we have every single state's acquisition platform linked in the supplier resource guide. So if you're interested in state and local, you'll want to get this guide, and including market research resources and some other business support. So check that out. Our fourth lesson is the new hacks for winning government work. So these are really exciting. When we talked earlier about some of these procurement innovation opportunities that we're sitting on and about to announce pretty soon at Public Spend Forum, we're talking about how you can take advantage of innovative methods of procurement. These are becoming exceedingly popular. They are really neat. I don't know as much about them as my colleagues. I'm about to yield the floor here in a moment, but there's challenge.gov, there's micro purchase repositories, really incredible ways to get into the government now that might not have existed 10 years ago. So we cover the traditional hacks like simplified acquisition procedures, SBIR grants, free and low-cost resources like GovShop, your free profile. We also talk a lot about non-traditional hacks, the Trojan horse method of getting into government, getting a really low-dollar contract or micro purchase, just so that you can get a seat at the table or get into somebody's text messages or email stream, make relationships. Again, those are really important to consider. I think one of our favorites here at Public Spend Forum are the other transaction authorities, and I have the pleasure of turning things over to Ben McMartin now, one of our leading authorities on OTAs. So Ben, I'm going to yield to you, man. Can't wait to see these slides.
Yeah, excellent. So I know we've only got about 12 minutes left here, but I think it's perfect where we ended up. So go ahead and build that chart out. The key piece in this non-traditional environment is, so you had a standard approach that we talked about how governments, federal government in this instant, uses a standard approach. And standard approach is pretty simple. The government decides what the solution is beforehand. That's called the requirements community or the schoolhouse. And then they do some market research, and that market research is really focused on who can deliver what I already decided was the solution to my problem. So in the standard approach, the government's already decided what it wants. The market research is really just to find out what companies are out there that can provide what they've already just determined is the solution. And then there's a very standard process. There's a synopsis which says, hey, we're going to come out and we're going to buy what we decided what the solution was. There's an RFP, request for a proposal. And then there's a very long and ritualistic process called source selection that some people have made entire careers of being fantastic at. I was one of them, so I can't hate on it too much. And then eventually there's an award. When you look at the way the standard process goes, the government decides what the solution is, and then there's this big, long process. And that's why it's all about the process and not about the technology. The government already decided what the solution is. Now it's on industry to be able to follow through the rituals to get to the end. So the purpose of this piece of the webinar is to talk about, okay, well, what if we want industry to tell us what the solution is and flip it on its head and go ahead and build out the rest of that chart. And that's what has really been coined acquisition innovation, and something that I spent, the latter part of 4 years in my government career working on, which was, hey, what are all the authorities out there? And there's a lot of them. I have some of them listed here, but what are all the authorities out there across of all federal government on how to do business differently? How do we define a problem first, or even better, how do we get with industry in a collaborative manner to help us define what our problem or our capability gaps are? And then everything changes down the list. So when you go to industry first and say, hey, this is our problem, we don't know what the solution is. When I say we, I'm talking from the government side. And then the market research is different now. It's not who can provide this for me. It's who's out there with what solutions and what ideas to solve my problem. Solicitation becomes different. Hey, maybe we need multiple steps to look at different solutions and how they'll solve our problem and what provides the best value. And then the negotiation piece actually gets pushed to the end here. In a lot of these scenarios, the scope of work gets drafted after a technology provider is identified. So totally flipped on its head. And so you'll see the mess that's created over here. I'll call it the mess, although I think we're friends with every one of these organizations. But this really is a mess of different groups providing different functions along the way. So if you're new to government industry or government contracting, it may be okay for you because you didn't learn the old way first. But it's still a very vast and confusing network that's built up around acquisition innovation. And I know the last piece here to build out is middle tier rapid prototyping and fielding. I won't go into that today. The good news is, while I'm only going to spend about 3 minutes on this stuff today, we have an entire free 1-hour webinar on acquisition innovation that will be coming out February 13th. At 2 o'clock, where you can get an entire hour of all the madness that is acquisition innovation. And again, that is a free 1-hour webinar. So here's a different way that solicitations are coming out. So Frank went ahead and told us about challenge.gov, and we talked about some different ways that entities are going about soliciting. How about commercial solutions opening? This was pioneered by Defense Innovation Unit Experimental and our friends my personal friends at ACC New Jersey, Army Contracting Command. But it has been implemented at GSA as well, and it's still building out. This is a long-term solicitation method where you can offer solutions to a problem set. Go ahead and build the rest of that slide out. Annual plan call for white papers. This is something that happens in the OTA world. The group here is my old command, Ground Vehicle Systems Center, and the FutureAirs team. This works a lot like a CSO. At the beginning of the year, there'll be a long-term solicitation for a number of areas that the Army, specifically in this instant, is looking for solutions. Go ahead and give me the next one. And so broad agency announcement. I have ONR and DARPA identified here only because they've been the longest proponents, at least in DoD side, of really leveraging the broad agency announcement. Army certainly did for a number of years, but not to the degree that DARPA and ONR use it. Broad agency announcement is a great long-term solicitation for basic, applied, and advanced research, much like the commercial solutions opening, which is actually for later technology. And then the last box here would be for prize challenges. Prize challenges have been around a long, long, long time. Lindbergh's transatlantic flight was a prize challenge. So challenges go back a long time. They are really coming back in popularity. And a part of that is due to the fact that the other transactions guide, which I was lucky enough to have quite a large role in drafting in this last OT guide. The folks from DIUX and the folks from Army were very specific about, we need to be able to take these prize challenge authorities and couple them with other transaction authorities and use it as a solicitation. So you will see some solicitations out there today where a prize challenge is actually the solicitation, which will lead into another transaction agreement. So you see two authorities paired together. And the reason that I have GovShop here is because none of these authorities requires, other than broad agency announcements, requires that these are posted to the government-wide point of entry, beta.sam.gov. I believe they all are, and most of the organizations are smart enough to still publish them on beta.sam.gov. But on GovShop, we've gone out of our way to make sure we're capturing these in addition to them being captured. And we've been working with agencies to allow them to go ahead and use our platform to publish their requirements in addition to their requirements for the GPE. And then give me that final chart. The final chart, I really want to talk about what OTA consortia are. There's a number of OTA consortia. This is my latest summary of the world of OTA consortia. I can tell you that every time I make a chart, it's out of date, even though this is pretty close to the most current chart out there. What's key here is to understand that there's 7, there's actually 8. I'll be updating this chart with NCMS now has its own OTA with Army Research Lab. So this will move up to 8 management firms. 8 management firms, that'll be 35 agreements. It'll be about $45 billion in available ceiling across these. And there's a number of consortia you can join for all sorts of different technologies. And so the 2 consortia that I managed when I was on the government side, which is on the far right, which is DATC and NAMC, those provide automotive, vehicle, robotics, autonomy, mobility. But almost every technology area is covered across these OTA consortia. So if you're a new small business startup or a mid-sized firm or even a large defense contractor, and you're looking for how the pipeline is now starting in a different area, pipeline for technology, which can field all the way into production, you really want to be looking at what OTA consortia can support you. And the reason I have GovShop at the top here is because GovShop is building out every OTA consortia currently so that we can finally have that location where people can go and find out what consortia fits what technology areas, how can I participate, who do I contact. That's been something that has never been centralized in any of the years since these started. And by the way, .c, the original OTA consortium model OTA, began in 2000. These are not new. They are 20 years old or 20 years young as of today. So these are new ways that government is going about buying things. Like I said, there's a 1-hour webinar that'll cover all this a little more in depth, and Public Spend Forum also has a full day workshop where you can really dig down and become an expert in OTA. 6 hours where we really go super deep, not just in identifying opportunities, but in how to negotiate the actual terms of these.
Ben, that's an amazing amount of information covered in about 7 or 8 minutes. I know I'll be signing up for this webinar that you're doing, the Acquisition Innovation webinar next month. Unisa put it in the chat link for anybody who's interested. We'll also include that free registration link in our post-course email, along with the slides and a recording of this presentation, which hopefully you've all enjoyed and gotten something out of, because that's the end of our time. We know it's a lot. We know it's a complicated market. We know it's an awesome market and it's worth pursuing. If you want to learn more, we would love to see you at our full in-person workshop, March 17th, 2020, right in the heart of Washington, D.C. You can register there. It's a really good deal. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reply to the email that we'll send in this post-course recap. That's all I have. Raj, any closing thoughts for us?
No, thank you. Thanks, everyone. And keep plugging away. You know, it's hard work, but it's also worth it. And I think the government needs all the great capabilities that companies bring. So let's make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time this afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.